Welcome back, everyone. Our first learning session will be led by Hugh Ali, Principal Operations Excellence. He will speak about the skilled labor shortage is a myth. The real shortage is skilled supervisors. Hugh spent over 20 years in a variety of managerial roles, starting as a frontline leader. He achieved measurable performance improvements in every role. He was co-owner and operations manager of a manufacturing firm for over 3 years, and then operations manager of a company rebuilding industrial pumps. An industrial engineer by training, he has been involved in the design of several maintenance facilities. Through his company, First Line Training, Hugh has taught core leadership skills to over 1,000 people. Hugh's book, Becoming the Supervisor, Achieving Your Company's Mission and Building Your Team, is about how to develop the 5 core skills of supervisors. It is told as the story of a young supervisor learning the job. Hugh's focus now is primarily on how leaders can improve both the performance of their operation and the skill of their frontline leaders by using an improvement cycle and a coaching cycle that develops their problem-solving skills. Hugh studied engineering at Waterloo and has taught courses at UBC, SFU, and BCIT about lean processes, project management, and strategy. He has written and presented frequently on project management, quality, risk management, lean principles, and supervisory skills. After Hugh is finished his presentation, we will open the virtual floor for questions. As a reminder, if you have any questions during or after the presentation, please post them in the Zoom box below. Over to you, Hugh.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm curious, how many of you have had trouble finding skilled labor? I'm sure it's an experience many of you have had, because it can be a challenge, and I've had that challenge myself. As operations manager for an aluminum railing company, it was a very seasonal business. We'd go from 35 employees in the winter to 100 or more in the summer and back down to 35. One of the skills we needed was aluminum welding, and it turns out that aluminum is really quite tricky. So we'd hire ticketed welders, and they would struggle for weeks trying to figure it out. And eventually they'd get it, but the production challenges in the meantime were horrible. So we taught our team leaders how to instruct. And once they had those skills, we discovered that we could take somebody with no previous experience and turn them into competent aluminum welders in about a week. And our problem of finding skilled labor went away. I'd like you to meet Sam. Sam was a supervisor I was going to be coaching. He worked in a company in a rural town of Alberta, not a big local labor pool. The first time I met him, I said, "How long have you been a supervisor?" "A few months," he said. "How did you get the job?" I asked. "Well, nobody else wanted it, and literally, I was the last person to step backwards." Poor Sam. His morning meeting was awkward. There were no ideas offered. As far as the crew were concerned, the problems that arose were his problems, not theirs. And there was a lot of uncomfortable silence. The meeting lasted an excruciating 25 minutes. After the crew drifted out to the production line, I asked him what was on for the day. He wasn't sure, but he thought he'd start with answering some of the questions from the crew at the meeting. He did that. What's up now? I asked. "Well, I don't think there's any point in you following me around now. I've got no fires. I think I'm just going to go pick up a welding torch on the line. We'll see if I can get another unit out this morning. We're so far behind." And so he headed out to the production line, worried about his delivery dates. He was not looking forward to the day. Sam is like so many supervisors I run into, overwhelmed, a bit over his head, not a great relationship with his crew. And we're going to come back to Sam because what he learned over the next 8 months transformed his work and his ability to address the issue of not enough skilled labor. The perception that there's a shortage of skilled labor is pretty widespread. And I'm here to tell you that it's a myth. The real problem is we have a shortage of skilled supervisors, of frontline leaders. And in the next 20, 25 minutes, I want to show you why that's so and show you that there are solutions to address that problem. You can solve it. The good news, I think, is that it's actually a lot easier to solve the problem of unskilled supervisors than it is to solve the problem of a shortage of skilled labor. And it turns out it's faster too. There are lots of surveys and reports that tell us about the shortage of skilled labor. Stats Canada has them, US Chamber of Commerce, variety of recruiting agencies. And if you're interested in the details, I'm going to post an article with those links in the website, becomingthesupervisor.com. But they all say pretty much the same thing. Somewhere between 25% and 50% of companies have real problems finding adequate skilled labor. The interviews that go with these reports tell a similar story. And so, for example, I saw a comment from Mark Schultz, who is the president of the Canadian Association of Oil Well Drilling Contractors. So Schultz's comment was, and I quote, "It's not a labor shortage as much as it is a skills shortage, a skills gap." How many of you can identify with that? It's not that companies can't find warm bodies. It's that they can't find warm bodies with the specific skills they need. But I think there's a faulty assumption there. The assumption is that I should be able to go out onto the street and find exactly the skills I need. But why would any company believe that? Why would we make that assumption? Well, I'm not sure. But here's my guess, and I think it stems from things that were true 50 to 75 years ago. And I see three things that were true then that aren't so true now. One, common skills. 50, 75 years ago, you could pretty much assume that any guy you hired, and let's face it, that long ago, they were guys, that any guy you hired was familiar with all the common tools. Second, the jobs were simpler. There was way less automation. Controls were all mechanical. And so life was just a lot easier to figure out. And third, the products were a lot simpler. 50 years ago, if you wanted a toaster, there were half a dozen options available. Today, on Amazon.com, you can find over 600 different toasters. But with common skills and simple jobs and a limited product range, it actually is pretty reasonable and easy to hire someone off the street, give them a half an hour of orientation, and set them to work. The thing is, 50 years ago, that meant that you could treat people as kind of interchangeable cogs in a machine. And I remember my English high school teacher telling me about some buddy of his who worked at Ford, and his job was to swing paint pots off one conveyor, around a corner, and onto the next conveyor. Very simple job. boring as all get out, great benefits package, easy to teach. Those jobs don't exist anymore. What's not so obvious, though, is that when you got a job like that, the ability of your supervisor to train doesn't matter so much. I mean, how much does it take to train a guy to push a paint pot around a corner? But today, when there's no common skill set, when there's way more complex technology, and where the product range is far greater, the skill of your supervisors in training really, really matters. So to summarize so far, we can't hire the skills we need off the street, and the world is now complex enough that the skills of our supervisors to train matters. So what do? Well, one of the things I've seen suggested is that the educational institutions should step up and provide the specialized training that we need. It's not going to happen. Why, you might ask? Well, let me give you an example. My buddy Felix runs a company in Vancouver. They make the harnesses and fittings and such that are used by helicopters to transport what they call external cargo. So imagine a helicopter with a bucket under it for fighting forest fires, or imagine a helicopter rescuing a couple of people at the bottom of a long line off a mountain. You got the idea. So this is a very niche company. It's small, under 20 people, and there are only half a dozen of them in the whole world. But he needs very specialized skills. So what does he do for hiring? Well, Felix used to go out and look for people who'd done commercial sewing. But it turns out that sewing bathing suits and fashion tops just doesn't get you ready to sew helicopter harnesses. The standards are different. The material is different. The machines are different. And Felix has given up. So I asked him, what do you do? He said, I now hire for attitude. It's the only thing I look at. No one out there has the skills I need. So Felix needs these specialized skills. They don't exist out there. And he only hires a handful of people a year. So what educational institution in their right mind would develop a training program for a company that's only going to hire a few people that need that particular skill? No one. They're going to lose their shirt if they do it. So now Felix hires solely for attitude and assumes that the company will train every person they hire. Now, think about your organization. Is there another organization out there that has your particular mix of products, equipment, processes, and standards? Your competitors? Well, they may have the same standards they work to, but I'll bet the combination of equipment and processes and products is different. And so if you hire one of their people, the best you get is familiarity with the product line. So if you look at that, excuse me. Oh yeah, I was going to ask, so how often do you find yourselves needing to retrain somebody who is supposedly experienced? So where are we? We have a problem. The skills we need aren't available off the street. Educational institutions aren't going to step up. And poaching isn't really going to solve anything for us either. So what do? I'd like to suggest we look back to a different context, different era, and see what we can learn there. In 1939, the US built about 1 million tons of ships, and they had about 50,000 people working in the shipping industry. At the start of the Second World War, staff at the US military looked at the situation and realized that if they were going to supply Britain, they were going to need a lot more ships. And then in 1940, the Allies lost 3.5 million tons of ships. So that was after building 1 million. They were going to need a lot of ships fast. By 1943, the US was building 19 million tons of ships a year, and they had 650,000 people working in the industry. That's 600,000 people that they had trained, many of whom had never seen a ship before they started the work. And in fact, there were many, many people working in those shipyards, including large numbers of women and African Americans who had never been inside a factory before. And the only reason they were able to achieve this was that the US War Manpower Commission had been able to develop a method of training that was far faster than anyone had imagined. How fast, you ask? Well, consider lens grinders. In 1939, it was accepted that it took 5 years to train a lens grinder. At that rate, the Allies would have lost before they'd trained the first one. But the US War Manpower Commission borrowed a bunch of training experts from industry to create the Training Within Industry Commission. And the TWI Commission worked to develop a structured and repeatable process of training that worked extremely well. By 1942, they had shown that they could train a lens grinder in by the end of 1940, they'd shown that they could train a lens grinder in just 5 months. And by 1942, they had it down to 5 weeks. In 1945, one company actually showed that they could take a new person, have them grinding quality lenses at production rates after 1 day. The TWI approach depended on the supervisors doing the training. And in the course of the war, the TWI Commission trained over 2 million supervisors in these skills. Doesn't that sound a lot like our situation? No available skilled labor, some labor available, but not with any particular industrial experience, a need to train people in a hurry, products that hadn't been imagined a year before, and often supervisors who had very little supervisory experience. That sounds a lot like our situation. And I think their solution gives us a clue about what we need to be doing. We need to train our supervisors. If the solution is to train our supervisors, what do we teach them? Well, the TWI Commission identified 5 skills. Supervisors need to know the job. They need to know their responsibilities. They need to know how to instruct. They need to know how to foster performance. And they need to know how to improve methods. And I'm going to add 2 more. They need to be able to set priorities, and they need to be able to listen. Now, it's interesting that TWI publications explicitly reference the need for communication skills. And they say, we're going to leave that to the companies. So really the only thing I'm adding to that mix is setting priorities. So what did the training for Sam look like? Sam knew the job of welding. He was pretty sketchy about his responsibilities, and he knew nothing about instructing or fostering performance or setting priorities. Like many trades, he had some okay ideas about how to improve methods. And so to start, we focused on the knowledge of responsibilities and setting priorities. We taught him some simple questions he could ask that gave him huge amount of understanding about what needed to be addressed next. And those questions were, how long will it take you to finish the work in front of you? Do you have everything you need to finish that work? Do you have what you need for your work tomorrow? And have you had any problems with the work so far? We walked through the department almost every day with him, coaching him as he asked these questions. And he learned that he could set priorities. He learned that he could identify repeated obstacles that his crews ran into, and he could pick them off one after the other. He learned that the best way for him to help his crew was not to pick up a welding torch, but to address the obstacles that slowed them down. And so he spent less and less time on the tools. Very quickly, he identified that many of his crew didn't have the skills they needed. And so we coached him on how to improve their skills. And he learned that when he coached his crew and improved their skills, the work went smoother and the rework went down. We walked beside him as he learned these skills, initially daily, and then as he got better and better, the frequency reduced over time. Later, we came back to the plant and taught Sam and his colleagues how to go about improving methods. And after 10 weeks working on that, they were able, or they had achieved changes that increased both production and productivity by 5 to 10%, and achieved, or they generated savings of $150,000 a year. When Sam learned these skills, he had learned it gave him the ability to accomplish many of the things that we expect from our supervisors. We need them to make improvements, to implement new policies, to hit production targets, to reduce lead time and improve quality and safety. But when our supervisors don't have the skills they need, they simply cannot do those tasks. We must build the skills of our supervisors, but that's not what most organizations do. I recently visited 4 facilities in about 2 days, and at every facility, I talked to the supervisors. Not one of them had received any training about how to do their job other than the legally mandated stuff, WCB, OSHA, employment standard stuff, all necessary, but hardly sufficient. How much sense does that make? Because when you think about it, our frontline leaders, we hand them $500,000 or more of payroll every year. And then we kind of say, hope it goes well, have a good day. And as we walk away, in our head, we're thinking, I sure hope it goes well. Because if it doesn't, I'm really up the creek. This is not smart. In fact, it's really expensive. Because in my experience, when a supervisor learns new skills, they're able to achieve improvements that are easily worth $5,000 to $50,000 a year. And in fact, I've seen one situation where the skills that a supervisor learned added $250,000 a year to the bottom line of their company. The extra profit is good. But in today's market, if your supervisors know how to instruct, the big gain is that you can hire a broader group of people and you get rid of the problem of no skilled labor. All you need to do is find capable and motivated people, and then your supervisors can train them. I hope I've persuaded you that if your supervisors know how to instruct well, it can free you from the vagaries of the current labor market. And it doesn't matter whether you're making brake pads or maintaining CNC equipment or rebuilding pumps. In every case, your task becomes or is reduced to finding and hiring people with a great attitude. And then you can train them with the technical skills they need to get them up to speed. And if they have familiarity with your product or your industry, that's great, but it's no longer necessary. There are some other benefits that show up when your supervisors have a great ability to instruct. A high-tech manufacturer improved the instruction skills of their supervisors and reduced the time it took them to bring on seasonal employees from 3 months to 1 month. A software company, virtually eliminated support calls when one of their supervisors used their skills to rewrite the instructions they gave to their clients. A company was able to improve its quality from average in the industry to the leader when they trained their supervisors on to help their staff learn how to inspect better. And along the way, they saved $1,000 a day. And a training manager in the food industry saw that her time to develop training was cut in half. Fortunately, it actually isn't too hard to teach your supervisors to instruct well. I'm a huge fan of the training within industry model. It just works well in my experience. And because it's a public domain program, there's no expensive proprietary material fees to pay. It takes 6 to 8 hours of instruction for people to learn how to write a good job breakdown. And it takes somewhere in the 8 to 10 hours of instruction for people to learn to instruct clearly, and they need some coaching. But that instruction can be delivered remotely, and there are enough people around in North America that you can find people to do that training on a competitive basis. The great thing is the payback is almost immediate. And if you want to know more about how to find folks that you can help you with this, go to my website, becomingthesupervisor.com, and follow the contact links, and I'll be happy to direct you to some of the resources available. Once your supervisors have the skills to instruct, then the question of who you can hire becomes much easier. Like Felix, you can hire for attitude and motivation, confident that your supervisors can train those people and bring them up to speed. At that point, you've dramatically expanded the potential number of candidates and freed yourself from the skilled labor shortages, all because you fixed some skill deficits within your supervisors. And our friend Sam, 8 months later, with lots of new skills, his morning meetings were crisp, 10, 12 minutes. His crew knew their priorities for the day. They knew they'd have the material they needed. When he identified that there was some material shortages that had showed up, they had great suggestions about how to adjust for it. They had learned that he was working to make their work easier, to remove the obstacles they faced. And their skills had improved, so rework was down and production went smoother. As he left the morning meeting, I asked him what was on for the day. He was going to address 3 questions that had come up in the course of the meeting. And then he was really looking forward to working on 4 different improvement projects. Oh, and his plant, in the 8 months, they doubled their production and didn't add anyone. Their lead time dropped from 6 months to 6 weeks. And for you financial folks, they freed up $1 million in working capital, all because the supervisors learned some skills. When supervisors have skills, better skills, especially in the area of instructing, you can expect the productivity of your maintenance crews and the quality of their work to go up. And this can happen in a matter of months or even weeks. It lets your company achieve its mission. The shortage of skilled workers is a myth. The best go-forward strategy I can recommend is focus on developing the skills of your supervisors. Help them master instruction, help them master setting priorities. And then you can hire folks with great attitude, and you'll find all the workers you need. And thank you very much for your attention. And I'm really happy to answer any questions that you might have at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Hugh. We now have some time for our question and answer part of the session. So please post your questions in the questions tab below. We had a couple come in. So due to IR 4.0, where a less human-based process is needed, how do we develop highly skilled supervisors? And do you think it will be less relevant?
Absolutely not. It will not be less relevant. So the way to develop supervisors, in my view, is always to use the current problems that you're facing as the context to identify the skills that they need. So if they're having, if people are having problems executing something correctly, then focus on instruction skills. If they're having trouble dealing with fostering performance, then work on those skills, and use the process of solving your current challenge as the driver. Because let's face it, adults learn best when they need to know something. They don't learn best when you just cram information at them.
Another question is how to hire for fit/attitude on general labor positions. The interview is short. What questions to ask?
Okay, it's a great question. Thank you. So what you're looking for is for people who aren't fazed when they run into obstacles. So you want to phrase questions that say, so give me an example of a time when you didn't have enough material to complete your work. Tell me about what you did. And what you're listening for is people who took action, who were proactive about going out and resolving the problem, rather than saying, oh, I told my supervisor, or I waited. Um, so what you're looking for are questions that tease out whether someone is willing to take initiative.
Great. Another question is, I concur with you, but in a large company, how do you convince HR, management, the unions, and hesitant supervisors that this can work?
So another great question. So I'm going to point at three things. The first is that when the training within industry model was developed, it was actually developed in consultation with the AFL-CIO and got the blessing of the US labor organizations. And in fact, there is a module design within the training within industry world designed for shop stewards. So I think it's easy to point back to that and walk union executives and union people through that process so that they can see that it's a very compatible with a union context. In terms of hesitant supervisors, my experience has been that if you let them try it, so start small in your organization, that what they discover is that it actually works. And in fact, many of the skills with this can work and fit within the current working environment. So if HR's got a whole bunch of policies, almost always the skills that we're developing using the training within industry model fit within and are compatible with the HR policies. My experience has been very positive in the union settings that I've used it.
What is the name of that shipbuilding training company? And TWI, what does it stand for?
Okay, so TWI stands for Training Within Industry. That wasn't the shipbuilder. The Training Within Industry Commission was a body that was developed specifically to train supervisors and in the working setting, because the US military identified that the biggest strategic shortage they were going to have was not material, but supervisors.
Okay. Supervisors generally work alone with their shift. How can we help maintain a positive attitude for them? When they are down, the whole shift suffers.
You're absolutely right. The attitude of supervisors transmits to their crew immediately. So if you go and talk to supervisors about what it is that has them down, it is often because there are obstacles that the company is putting in their way of getting their work done. And they don't have the skills to get past those obstacles. So my experience has been that when they are better skilled, they are happier doing their work. You think about giving some and it's a whole different setting, but think about how a child can get totally frustrated if you give them too difficult a puzzle, right? You don't give a 1,000-piece puzzle to a 4-year-old. You give them a 7-piece puzzle, and it's an easy puzzle. So as humans, if the stress of the situation is too high, we can't learn. And so what we need to do is find ways to reduce the stress level enough that people can learn. And helping them learn skills is a really effective way to do that.
If you had to pick one top basic specific skill that all supervisors should master, which would it be? And how would it be the best way to train this specific skill?
Okay, so that's a great question. And the answer is in two parts, because the where do you start question always arises. So what you need to do is think about the environment, the social environment in your organization. Is there a good working relationship between the supervisors and their crews, and between the supervisors and their managers? If that relationship is good and constructive, then I would start with the skill of instruction. However, if that relationship is not great, or if you went in and observed that the supervisor was always telling his crew exactly what to do and not listening to them, if you saw very little consultation, very little freedom for people to do the work, or if you've got tons of grievances coming from that area, then I would start with the training within industry module called Job Relations, which is about how do you foster performance. And it's a problem solving with people skill set. And I would start with those.
What were those 5 to 6 main skills for supervisors?
So the skills are how to instruct, how to foster performance, how to improve methods, how to set priorities, and how to listen. So if a supervisor can do all of those reasonably well, they'll be a pretty awesome supervisor.
Great. Hugh, can you repeat them again? Because someone else was asking.
Sure. So they are the skill of instructing, the skill of fostering performance. So it's the people side of things. The skill of improving methods, of setting priorities, and listening.
Great. And our last
I'll
question.
put those in the chat after the Q&A is done.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm in a really specialized industry. Can the TWI approach work when the work is so specialized?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me give you two examples. One of the companies I worked with makes the tags that scientific researchers use to study fish populations. So they're making items that range in size from this big to about that big. Electronics, acoustics, waterproofness, the skill of assembling those. I just shook my head when I watched the process the first time. Very, very specialized. There are two companies in the world that make those things. They're the company that I mentioned that reduced the time to bring on a seasonal worker from 3 months down to 1 month.
Great. We reached the end of our session, Hugh. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I encourage people to look at the website for my book. If they want to get a hold of me, happy to answer questions. Becomingthesupervisor.com. There are lots of links there to get in touch with me. Happy to help if anyone's got any further questions.
Thank you once again, Hugh, for a very informative session.
Thank you so much, Miriam. It was my pleasure.